Lounge in Boulder, Colorado. Welcome to Retool TV with George Thomas. You know, sports sanctioning bodies have really been in the news of late, and we thought it would be a great idea to bring in the director of the Bicycle Racing Association of Colorado. It's Chris McGee. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me.
And we also wanted to have a discussion with promoter of one of the largest event production companies in the country, Without Limits, Lance Panigutti, co-founder, co-race director. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, George, for having us on.
All right, well, let's get into I don't want to be too controversial, but I'd really like to get some good discussion going with you guys. Chris, if you could start out just telling us what is the purpose of a sanctioning body? I mean, why are they out there?
Sure. Well, you take it from the national level. You know, there's a national level sanctioning body, and they work with the Olympics and national level events, and then working also to grow the sport and provide insurance and a structure for the sport as a whole in the country. We at the Bicycle Racing Association of Colorado now serve as the local association of USA Cycling here for Colorado and southeastern Wyoming. And our mission has not changed, and it's been the same for about the past 35 years. And we want to support amateur riding, amateur racing here, and provide a mechanism to structure the calendar, provide help with upgrades, and support our event directors.
So someone like Lance can actually go out and get insurance on his own and fulfill that type of requirement, get his own permitting, obviously, and everything like that. So what added value does a sanctioning body bring to an event promoter? Yeah,
and that's our greatest challenge. And we've had a year of transition, year and a half now, from being independent of USA Cycling and sanctioning races ourselves. And that was a mechanism by which we had promoters working through us. Now, with USA Cycling being part of USA Cycling, the permit process grows a little bit longer, a little bit bigger. And the big challenge for us is to provide that value in such a way that the promoters think, I'd be crazy not to put my race with BRAC for what they offer us. Is that support with permitting, support with insurance, race numbers, the availability of our race kit, which is in the equipment required to put on a race. Course tape for cyclocross, banners, cones, all the different types of things that goes to put on a race.
Chip timing.
Oh, it's early, George. It's early for that. Just bring that right out. That's really where we are, though. What we want to do is be an organization that strikes that right balance for our cycling community in supporting the big stakeholders, which are the athletes, the promoters, the officials, and the communities in which our events happen. And finding that right balance it's kind of a never-ending quest. It's the holy grail to get there. But I think we're making good decisions and good strides in making that happen.
And I brought up chip timing. I was kind of joking because that was such an issue last season. But I do feel like you guys listened to the event promoters and made some changes that were valuable.
Yeah, we as you know, we got a lot of input from a lot of different sources.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and some of it right through your programs. And what really became apparent last year, and there was two main events, and of course there were two of the biggest. There was Superior Morgul, which is 800 rider, essentially road race day, and there was Boulder Cup, which is about 800 rider cross day. And at that magnitude of an event, we saw that the model under which the timing system was deployed was not working, and that was using the numbers in the database and a separate identifier number for the chips rather than tied to that event itself. And we went, oh boy, this is really difficult, because then it's tied directly through registration to get correct in order to make it all jive and end up at the end of the day. And it just wasn't happening with that model. And then in the middle of trying to decide how to deploy it into a new model of chip management and chip deployment, the company got sold. The French company who we bought it with sold their timing business to a Belgian company, and the price structure changed dramatically. There's no U.S. representation. So we said, this is on a timeout right now, until we have all these assurances that we're going to have support within the states and hardware we can trust, and if and when there's a problem, because everything has problems, we have an ability to get that rectified immediately, rather than going across the pond and going back and forth. And we also need to make sure that the pricing structure is going to be something that we can sustain, and that was not the case as that developed at the end of last year.
I thought that was an admirable decision, actually, on your part, because that was such a big investment. Lance,
yeah.
You put on 50-plus events a year?
Yeah, 53 this year.
So what do you receive as far as benefit from a sanctioning body?
It's interesting when we look at cycling, because out of those 53 events, 20 of those are in the cycling world, whether it be road racing or cyclocross. So for us, working with 3 different sanctioning bodies, whether it's USA Triathlon, USA Swimming, or USA Cycling, everyone's a little bit different, and we receive a different value from each one. And I can say working with Chris and the local association, it's almost too good to be true because we get 2 for 1. We get to work with USA Cycling, handling all the permitting, but then we have that local support, whether it's through Chris or Yvonne, to essentially, I won't say do our marketing for us, but provide unity to the local scene where racers have a one-stop shop to go to find a calendar. And to find a calendar that's not only balanced, but spread out and structured in a way that works for everyone. It works for the promoters, it works for the racers. Not a lot of sports have that. USA Triathlon, it's a free-for-all. Racers have to go find races through their own channels, through their own various calendars throughout the year, and it's not as unified. There's not that structure in place that provides a pipeline, especially for juniors, to kind of work their way up through the sport to the professional level that USA Cycling provides. Do they have their issues? Of course, any governing body is going to have their issues. But for us, it's a nice way to get our numbers, get our pins, get our sanctioning done in one place, get our insurance done in one place, and have athletes have one calendar to go to find all the races.
Now, you guys did have some friction last year, especially with the timing issue. Did you work together on this a lot? I mean, I know you worked with other promoters, but what did you see throughout the year where you thought, okay, this is going to work for 2013 and we do want to have this relationship?
I think the hardest thing when we had that friction last year was we had the same goals.
Yeah.
We had the same objective at the end, and I think that's the message that didn't really come across to the racers or the community. They thought we wanted A, they thought Chris wanted B, and really we were going for the same objective of pushing the sport to the next level technologically, because chip timing is the future. No one's going to argue with that. It was just how do we go about it? Is it coming down through the sanctioning body, through the local association, or is it up to the event director to provide their own chip timing through professional chip timing companies? Obviously, we kind of met in the middle, and he took a lot of our feedback, we took a lot of his feedback, because we did use the ACA system for 2 years. And our goal the whole time was, when we first chip timed a race back in 2009, that's not a burden that should be placed upon the sanctioning body. They have enough of a responsibility taking care of all the memberships, insurance claims, getting the calendar set. That's their job. That's the scope of what the organization as a nonprofit should be. With chip timing companies, I mean, that's a whole separate business that we ourselves aren't ready to move into. We're a production company. There's companies out there that their whole job is just to chip time a race. And you know, I mean, you're an event director yourself, being behind the computer with all the issues that can happen during a race, trying to troubleshoot, that's a job that should just be standardized to just a chip timing company. So for us, the model has always been, we're willing to pay more, knowing what kind of service we're going to get, because we use certain companies throughout the year. And just like a free market system, not all chip timing companies are created equal. Some provide all the bells and whistles that we saw in cyclocross, and some provide a bare bones experience where it's a lot cheaper, but riders are just getting printed results. And that's okay, but we wanted the flexibility to be able to choose between all the bells and whistles or a bare bones system.
Now, again, you put on triathlons, you put on running events, you put on all sorts of different things, and you are working with a number of different sanctioning bodies. Are some easier to work with than others?
I'd say so.
You're also not only in Colorado, you have events out of state.
We have 4 events out of state, actually 5 events out of state, and those are all triathlon events. So we're working with USA Triathlon.
So strictly with the trifecta. Okay.
I'd say every governing body has its pros and cons. We have our issues where a pro of USA Triathlon is we feel it's a little bit more free market in terms of the calendar restrictions. It's wide open. Yet, there's also a case of, especially in Colorado over the last couple of years, different event directors popping up, and I won't say stealing venues, but copying courses, copying venues. That doesn't happen in the cycling world. There's systems in place that if someone else wanted to put on Koppenberg, Chris would be like, no, it's not happening. You're not using the same course in the same venue. That's a without limits event. It happens all the time in the triathlon world, and it's an issue. So yeah, it's a pro, but it also serves as a con.
Chris, tell us about the best all-around rider, best all-around team competition that you have here in Colorado.
Sure. So this is a long-standing tradition in bicycle racing across the country. Pretty much every state or there used to be districts and their states and areas have season-long competitions for the team, for the rider. We have embraced that and continued that tradition with a little bit of a better brand. I like to think a better branding twist with Cross Cup or Colorado Cross Cup, Rocky Mountain Road Cup. This year we've got Colorado Track Cup. An ability to really try to determine who is that best rider in the different categories throughout the course of the season over a variety of disciplines within the sport. So it's hill climbs and time trials and criteriums, road races. It's a big tradition within Colorado and certainly nationwide to be able to identify these riders. It's a major effort, as you can imagine. I think we're at 25 road categories this year again. So it's a lot of tracking. It's a lot of getting things right. It's a lot of number crunching, and then doing it with team as well. It's another level of complexity as far as people change teams, people upgrade, people move around, and even trying to keep those points going correctly is a major effort for us to facilitate and get that program going. It is one of the most important things we do. We really feel like it's one of our important products as an organization is to be able to deliver these competitions timely, accurate, and they're relevant. People really tune into which races are at what level, what points are on offer, and make some decisions about how they race and where they race accordingly.
A little off track, but I think it's a question that a lot of racers have. What happens when you upgrade mid-season? Maybe you're winning your category as best all-around rider, and all of a sudden you've been told you've got to upgrade because you're doing so well.
Yeah.
What happens there? Is that just tough luck?
In some points it is tough luck. I mean, in some ways, that's kind of how the sport is structured. I mean, we're structured by skill categories, and when you've hit the ceiling on one, it's time to move up. What we see a lot of is the other side of it, where we've got, especially the category 4, we've got the problem where people are at the upper end of that category and not wanting to move up, and it really causes a lot of consternation and concern on the lower half of that field. If you're in an introductory field, the goal should not necessarily be to kick the snot out of people who have just begun or new beginners to that sport. So to this end, one thing we're really working to address, and we've got a lot of feedback over the last couple of months, and the next big piece that we do is our Cross Cup policy, which will define how the Cross Cup and the cross season works this year. And the proposal that's out there right now, and we've talked about this, is having a split season for the category 4s, because there is a lower ceiling now for automatic upgrades. Give a reward moment when that first season ends, which would be roughly the end of October. At the party, there will be 2 seasons of awards for the category 4s. So those people who do hit their ceiling, who are bumped up, they don't go empty-handed. They've hit their goal, they've made their achievements, because that's what we want people to really get out there and get after it. But at the same time, once you're really excelling at the sport, you shouldn't be in that introductory category anymore.
And let's be honest, one of the other big issues in Colorado is a Cat 4 in Colorado is not like a Cat 4 in anywhere else in the country. We usually tell people when they come up to register that just moved here, they're like, well, I was a Cat 4 in Utah, or I was a Cat 3 in Connecticut, downgrade. Well, now you're a Cat 5, or now you're a Cat 4, because that's also an issue. You get people at the upper end of the Cat 4 that, if they went out of state, I know some Cat 4s in Colorado that could be racing Cat 2, or winning a Cat 3 race in another state.
Tell us about the Confederation Cup that Without Limits is doing.
Love the Confederation Cup. So the Confederation Cup basically evolved, and this is one of those things when the news broke, everyone thought it was in competition or in conflict with Best All-Around Rider, with the Road Cup. And I just want to go on the record saying it's not in competition, but in addition to. All the races that are in the Confederation Cup are also ranked very highly, whether silver or gold status, within the Road Cup. The way we looked at it was we do the same thing with our triathlon events and also our cyclocross events with the Boulder Cyclocross Series, is we like to look at our races as in-house events and be able to tie them together with a brand. When it came to the road season, a lot of feedback we got looking at the demographics of the road racers was there's a lot of people that they're diehard road racers. They will race almost every weekend from April all the way to the Steamboat Stage race in September. Those are the people that are served by the Road Cup. They love it. They go after it every year. That's not going to change. There's also a handful of people, especially people getting into the sport, that would love to challenge in the Road Cup and be a part of it, but that's a long season to ask someone to commit from April to September. And it's a lot of races. And for them, what we said with the Confederation Cup was, all right, let's condense that season down a little bit. Let's look at it as essentially 2 months. And let's pick our races. And when we looked at our races, and when Doug Williams from Curve, who was kind of the brainchild behind the Confederation Cup, looked at our races, he said, you got 2 crits, you get a hill climb, you get a TT, you got 2 road races. That's perfect. That's a nice blend to be able to pick essentially the spring version of the best all-around rider. Obviously that's going to change when people finish out the year with the Road Cup, but for us it was, all right, let's create something for the spring races, our races, that really blended things together, and it's almost a mid-season break, what you talked about, for the Road Cup as well. People are going to finish the Mike Horgan Hill Climb, and they're going to be awarded, in their category, a certain set of prizes. They're going to be awarded a jersey by Curve, and we're going to rank people 10 deep. And then after that, it's over. And then the people that are diehard road racers, who are just committed to the full road season, they're going to continue on, and they're going to continue being ranked with the Road Cup. So that's, I think, the best way to look at it, is it's not a conflict, but in addition to. It's an added bonus for riders to kind of see a mid-season ranking among a melting pot of races that really help determine, all right, a good all-around rider, not just the best crit rider or the best road racer or the best time trialist.
Chris, you've got an event promoter here, brings a lot of value to BRAC, brings you a lot of riders. There are a lot of unsanctioned races going on out there right now. Is there any, will that create conflict between BRAC and promoters like Lance that are really working closely with you?
I don't see, at the end of the day, the funny thing, and Lance and I talked about a lot last year, we'd get together, we'd talk about big picture goals, what are we all trying to do? What are we really trying to accomplish here? And it all boils down to the same thing. We are really trying to put on great race experiences for athletes from pro level to entry level. And how are we best going to do that? And that's what it goes down to. I don't think there is ever going to be a situation in which all races are sanctioned. I think there's always going to be room on the calendar and room in the world for different types and different levels of races. What I'll say again, what we want to do is provide value to our event directors and to our athletes that it makes more sense to be sanctioned with us. They will get more benefit up from it. They will get, as an event director, you'll get more athletes. You'll have a lower overhead with your advertising being down, with our ability to provide equipment and numbers and disposable items, all those kind of things. At the end of the day, we need to make it make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, people are going to go elsewhere. And so we work closely with all the promoters who will speak with us to say how we work together to make this happen. In a lot of races, a lot of events will look at, if you're an unsanctioned event, you go, why would I bother doing that? Well, call me, let's talk. I'll tell you what our point of view is and what we can offer to maybe make your event better. And better being, you probably have a great race experience, but do you want to grow it? Do you want to be connected to anything larger? And some people don't. And to me, that's fine. I mean, I'm not out here to have a monopoly and run the world over. That's not what we're here for. We're here to support what's happening and help grow it for all of us. And when Lance succeeds, we succeed. When events grow and bring a higher level of technology, bring in new vendors, bring in new sponsors, bring in more riders. I mean, this is what Without Limits is doing. This is what all of our events are doing and working towards. Then we all benefit and we all grow, and we're all also learning from these new practices and the new connections, the new relationships that are developed. So
I think going back to your original question, working with different sanctioning bodies, when it comes to having a voice in the community, say in the triathlon world, I'm only 14 sanctioned races out of 1,500 sanctioned races that will take place throughout the year. That's a small player in the industry. When it comes to Colorado, having a local association with our set calendar, whether it be cross or road, Chris and I talk all the time. In spite of popular opinion on 303, all those conversations very friendly.
We're going to disappoint him if we don't.
I know.
A little bit.
He knows everything that's going to come out before it goes public. I mean, I sent him, whether it was the Confederation Cup or whether it was those 2 preseason cyclo-X races, he knows about it before the public knows about it. And we can talk about those 2 unsanctioned races, but it's nice to have that voice because it keeps us in check as a promoter, but I think it keeps USA Cycling and the local association in check too. It's a give and take.
Now, you said 14 races out of 1,500 is a small voice, but in Colorado, you actually have a lot of races compared to most of the other promoters. Does that give Lance more of a voice with the sanctioning body than someone who's smaller?
I mean,
I'm trying to get the fist going.
Yeah, well,
even if they're both coming at me.
Yeah, and with your one arm tied behind your back, it's going to be ugly. I mean, certainly they've got more. They've got votes. The way our organization is structured, voting goes through the annual meeting of the club council, and votes are by membership size within a club or revenue generated. That was a change that was made probably about 4 years ago. So certainly they've got a strong voice there. But this really goes to the bigger picture of we are in an organization that's in a lot of change. A few years ago, even 5-6 years ago, all of our events were put on by member clubs who were traditional bike racing clubs. Guys with jobs, guys and girls with jobs, families, lives, racing themselves, putting on a race in their spare time. As our community has grown and our racing numbers have grown and they're through the roof, as we all know, there's been this development that's personified by Lance of professional organizations coming in here and making their living putting on events. And it might be tri or mountain bike or road bike, whatever it is. But this is a big change for our organization to really think back. Oh, we went from a club of 30 guys who were putting on a criterium and scrounging for volunteers and trying to pull it all together for a weekend to professional companies who are doing this. And so when you start talking about the conflicts of perception and the different ideas that are out there, a lot of that's just driven by the simple change that we're going through. And you look at really what's a reasonable expectation for a small club to put on a race? And you're going, it's a lot of work. I mean, we've all put on races. It can crush you for a year beforehand till the race and a couple months of cleanup afterwards just to do one event. And what's the reasonable expectation for a club of volunteers to pull that off successfully and not go crazy at the same time? Anything above 300, 350, 400 athletes, it is a mammoth undertaking. And for us, the biggest races we have on our calendar, both road and cross, are with professional guys. These guys, Chris Grealish with DBC.
And it's a shift that really started to take place when Chris took over as executive director. I think right at the same time.
It started,
a little bit before
really started
that.
coming in, but that's when it really started to blossom was, wait a second, these events are huge. And almost, you're going to require staffing to do this, not volunteers. And this is our general point of view with where we sit in the hierarchy and the way the models are built for local organizing or for local associations around the country. Most LAs are run on volunteers or with a very low staff overhead. And that's not our model at all, and it hasn't been for 15 years. Figure the workload that we have and the work that we're trying to accomplish and the different programs and initiatives that we have could not be accomplished by purely volunteers. And just we run into this, this kind of notion is we're in a different spot within the country as our organization. These guys are in a different spot, similar, within how racing has long worked here in Colorado. But it's all part of an evolution, in my mind, of where the sport's going. I mean, the bicycle racing is huge in the country. This is the biggest it's ever been in the United States. Both the number of pros, I think, is probably at an all-time high. That is an indicator. The kids coming up the pipeline at the national and international level is unbelievable. Road, cross, track, mountain bike. Mountain bike probably not quite as much there as the others, but I mean, it's huge. And then participation rates among amateur athletes are huge, as what these guys see week in and week out, and we do. And you start to wonder what model is going to work for this to continue growing. And our contention from us is paid staff is the way to go to keep this train on the right tracks and keep going, and working with professionals who do have the time and the bandwidth to commit to making events successful for 800,000 riders on a racer day. It's hard to see another model that's really going to succeed to continue with this kind of growth.
And if you look at that evolution, I mean, the evolution essentially happened. Take marathons. They were run by track clubs, Boston Track Club, Atlanta Track Club, up until the 70s and the 80s. And then they became professional production companies because their numbers were hitting 5,000, 10,000, now 25,000 participants. With triathlon, they were club productions. They were mom and pop productions in the 90s. And then come mid-90s, late 90s, that same professional level production change happened. I think cycling is just lagging behind the curve a little bit, or just the next evolution to happen, especially with cyclocross. I mean, if you look at the numbers growing 10, 20% a year, it's where triathlon was 10 years ago, it's where running was 10 years prior to that. So in essence, having those local associations, like I said, allows those professional companies to come about and take the sport to that next level, but it keeps those checks and balances in place.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about what is the role, and in the past we've had some headbutting about what is the right role for each of our organizations as a production company or as an nonprofit organization helping structure the sport. And it goes back to effective support, effective structure of the calendar, working with the riders, the members, the upgrades, helping debug problems when things happen, and providing whatever it might take to help a promoter's race succeed. And that's where we really meet on common ground. So when we do have a particular instance of a flare-up, and rather than having a fight on TV, which would probably be pretty fun, but rather than doing that, we have a conversation, and we get together and drink some coffee, and we talk about, okay, let's start at our common ground, and how does that model of where we want to be, relate to this particular topic that on which we don't agree. And we've sorted everything out that's come up so far, and knock on wood, that'll be how we go in the future.
Lance, what are some changes for 2013 that BRAC has helped you develop?
I think the biggest change moving forward has been really when it comes to the chip timing and working with the officials. We have a great timing company that we implemented for cross this year. A lot of the racers who raced cross saw live results. It was awesome watching guys walk around the course with their iPhones, yelling out lap splits to their riders and friends while they were racing. But having a company like that and having that consistency of that's the company we're using and they're coming in and week out, they got to know the officials really well.
Yeah.
And by the third and the fourth race, it was seamless. There were some hiccups for the first couple ones as they kind of learned the lingo, the timing company learned the cycling lingo, officiating crew learned how this timing company worked. But having that consistency of these are our officials, this is our timing crew, everyone knows everyone, they all know what to expect from each other, worked for cross. By the 6th and 7th race, it was great. We're using the same company for Koppenberg, Morgul Bismarck TT, and the Morgul Bismarck Road Race this year. And we're expecting the same level of professional results, fast results, that wouldn't have been possible if we were just working with the same officiating crew and timing crew for the first time.
You do have a couple of non-sanctioned cyclocross races this year.
Had to bring that up, didn't you?
I did.
Chris knew about them.
What's the purpose of that?
Really, the purpose was to extend the season a little bit. For us, we wanted to have some fun. My brother comes from the BMX racing world. I came from the pro tri world. And there were such unique formats that we grew up with. We were looking at cyclocross going, why not cross? And we kept talking to a lot of cross racers going, I would love that format. Why don't you try it out? So this is our way to really try something out new that's never been done before, kind of get the rider feedback on it, and hopefully implement it in season years down the road if it catches on. The unsanctioned part of it was they're midweek races. It's 2 midweek races. We wanted to keep it cheap and affordable. And it's something we were able to do through our private insurance company that we use for our Stroke and Stride and Aquaman events that wasn't going to be possible through USA Cycling. To have a price point where we could pay our venue fees, our timing fees, and keep the entry fee under $20. Because the goal was we want people to try out these unique formats midweek. We also want people who have never tried out cyclocross to try it out. And to try it out in a way that they love it, they're hooked, they buy that BRAC membership, they buy that USA Cycling membership, and then they're racing 7 to 10 races in season.
Now, when we've talked in the past, you've said part of your goal really isn't to compete so much with other promoters, it's to elevate the quality of the events that are being put on in the area. But also at the same time, you're trying to bring down your entry fees, because we've talked a lot about that as well. You know, for the value, why are you paying this when we can give you this higher value for a lower fee? Chris, what kind of response do you get from other promoters with what Lance is doing? Does everyone see that as a positive?
Well, no. I mean, everybody doesn't. There's a level of frustration out there. with the fact that these guys are a lot of times bringing more value at a equal to or less than price point. And this goes back to the conversation of we're in a time of evolution, and the one-off clubs are not buying in bulk. They're not maximizing their economies of scale. They're not professionals who know what they're doing week in, week out. You know, part of that is just the reality that these guys, they do know what they're doing. They have run all their numbers. They're doing this 52 times a year.
53.
53 this year, right? I mean, so there's some frustration out there among some of the other clubs, and some other promoters who are saying, boy, how are we going to compete with this? And so, that's part of what we're doing is as we try to strike a balance between different types of promoters, different types of events, different host communities. And we've got, as everybody knows, the Boulder bubble effect is huge in road and cross. And getting athletes to drive. 10 years ago, we would all drive to a race in Grand Junction, not think anything of it. Now, maybe 100 guys will do that. You know, it's a very different demographic within our membership. You know, we're rolling with very large changes, you know, demographics, aging population, people don't want to drive as much. Denver itself has grown so much that the Denver area, there's just not as many close, easy road races to permit as there are. So you start talking about where does this all add up? And it is very hard to put on a bike race. At the end of the day, it's a lot of work, it's very hard. How do we fit within all these different parameters of communities, racer tendencies, price point, perceived value, points on offer, an additional competition versus a season-long competition. I mean, there's a lot of different moving pieces in here that go into the decision-making process of where and when people race their bikes. And these guys are a part of that. All our promoters are a part of that conversation, and we're trying to do it, trying to make decisions as fairly as possible so that events succeed and don't go away. Because at the end of the day, we like having a full calendar, and we've got that in road, cross, and track this year. And the midweek stuff, to speak on the midweek things, is it's a great time to take a risk. It's a great time to try a different format. It's a great time to have maybe mentoring for senior men, that kind of thing. It's a great time, great time of the week, time of the day to make those sort of things happen, because you've got the flexibility with lower price points and less pressure to try a new format and see how it goes. And if it's a success, then let's move it to prime time. You know, that's kind of how we're looking at it, and especially cyclocross. I mean, the opportunities to try new formats are huge. We saw really good success last year with a first urban race, with a first cross time trial ever, with some events that had A, B, and C, D categories rather than our full slate, and just really playing around with different ways to structure the sport so that we keep people coming back. We attract them and then we retain them. And we're all saying the same thing about how do we best go about doing that.
I know I showed my age by letting Tri-Fed slip out. It's hard for me to still say USA Triathlon. Oh yeah, we're back in the 80s, man. Yeah. But part of the fun of bike racing was actually driving to get to some of these races that were way out in the middle of nowhere. How does a team from Grand Junction, how are they able to compete in best all-around rider with someone, say, who's in Boulder? And there are so many more races.
That's where I might finally disagree with Chris here on one of the comments he made. To go back, I was going to say, we're competitive, but really we're competitive, and let's be honest, we're competitive with the other promoters. We'd be a bad business if we weren't.
Right.
It'd be like Apple not saying Microsoft's a competitor. But really we're competitive within ourselves. Anyone who's met Tony and I, we fight more than Chris and I fight. Tony and I fight all the times. I want to buy new toys. He controls the checkbook, so it's this constant battle.
So we have Tony on next week with you?
That'd be a good one. That'd be a heated one.
Get the Italian brothers on the same place.
I mean, we bought a new toy last week that he finally broke down. Was like, all right, let's do it. And it's going to be rolled out at Koppenberg. And once word got out of what it was, Retool was jealous and is calling me up saying, who's your contact? We need one of those. I mean, it's that type of competition that's going to elevate the community as a whole. And bringing in new sponsors, bringing in non-endemic sponsors to the sport, bringing in endemic sponsors who are local and want to look at Colorado like Shimano and elevate the level of racing in Colorado. Shimano just signed on as our new cyclocross series sponsor. And it's great because they want Colorado to be known as Shimano cyclocross territory. But to comment on a promoter in Grand Junction, where Chris and I disagree on, is I think it's okay if some races go away. whether it's another promoter's race or it's one of our races. It's okay to see that kind of turnover. One area in the triathlon world that I do see as a pro is every year 3 races go away, 3 to 4 races come on the calendar. And it's just through that natural attrition of, well, that was a bad race. Or they put on a very poor production, or it's a poor venue or a poor course. It goes away, it allows opportunity for a new race to come up and for racers to try that new race, and it might be a better race. I mean, it keeps me on my toes in the triathlon world. Most of the money that we make and energy and focus is put into cycling and cyclocross, but the majority of it goes into triathlon to maintain that competitive edge. Knowing that a big company owned by a hedge fund could plop down a race in Colorado any day, throw a ton of money at it, and squeeze us out. And we have to maintain that competitive edge of we're the locals' favorites. And that makes us better, it makes our races better, it makes it better for the athletes because they get a price point that's still comparable for them. And I think the same thing is happening and can happen to a greater degree in the cycling world, where races that aren't getting the numbers or they're a poor level of production, yeah, they fade away in the distance, allowing another club in Grand Junction to say, I have an 80-mile road race from Grand Junction to wherever, and it's going to be awesome, and then people travel.
Chris?
It's interesting. It goes back also, we're back to balance. So we've got the balance of traditional races, and then you kind of got the excitement of new stuff. And how does that all shake out? And that goes, it's good questions for us, it's a good question for our board. We actually talked a lot about this at our board retreat last month, and it kind of had some similar ideas. Like, we have got a calendar that is pretty, for Colorado, it's pretty traditional. The big change we've had in the last year was really integrating the collegiate calendar into it, which has been, I think, a really great development, because you've got essentially a preseason of races, and people don't necessarily need to come out firing all guns right away. But the real Colorado calendar hasn't changed dramatically in a long time, and it's interesting to see how this will work. Are there races, when they go away, will we have new races come in to fill that void? And because races, there's always going to be change at every level of the sport with which events are on offer, and really the fear, the honest, the big concern is, if and when races go away, who will come in and step up to fill that void? At this point, that's, we haven't gone through that in a dramatic fashion yet, in that you go to a promoters meeting and it's full, road, cross, full. People are, not fighting over dates, but there's certainly a lot of wheeling and dealing going on to make it happen. So I do think there will be some natural sort of evolution to events, and especially as they grow, because the fundamental reality, again, it's hard. It's hard work to do it right. And if you're a small group trying to put on a race, you're going to really put yourself into a lot of work. And that's why we appreciate so much of what our clubs do, because we know that people are getting out there and putting in effort, because they love the sport and they want to see not just their events succeed, but the calendar as a whole in the racing community. It's a lot, but part of the reality is it's a lot of work, and you have to take some financial risk involved and give up a lot of your time and efforts. So races will change. We just want to make sure when one goes away, we've got something equal then or better to come into that spot.
I do want to focus on the individual rider, though, that's farther away from Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins. How do they compete in some of those season-long competitions?
Well, certainly it's challenging. I mean, that's a huge commitment.
I mean, does that just take away kind of that aspect of their racing season?
I think unless you're incredibly dedicated and committed to travel, and that's okay, you're not going to be able to compete very effectively in a season-long competition. It's almost impossible. It has gotten easier for an out of bubble athlete in the last years, as we've got the different levels now within the cup competitions. You can highlight and kind of pick out, oh, that's a gold event, I need to do well at, that's a gold event. Maximize your points per effort.
Okay.
So that can help with that, and that's one of the big reasons we've done that, is it's not an attendance contest. If you really structure your season accordingly as an athlete, you can do well in a cup season, in a cup competition, by targeting specific races rather than having to race 6 straight months, 3 weekends a month. That's a lot of commitment. But the reality, and this is also the big fundamental reality, is we're sitting here in Boulder. This is probably the highest density of competitive amateur athletes in the world for endurance sport. You know, running, tri, cycling racing. So is that a great thing? It's fantastic. I mean, where else can you sit in a world-class business talking about one of the most you know, exciting communities of racing that's out there? So it's a great thing, but it's also a challenge in that the athletes have so many great choices to race locally here because of the event directors have responded to this great demand and said, hey, we're going to supply you great races because this is the single biggest community for this sport probably in the world at this, you know, at the level we're talking about. You know, so at the end of the day, you're looking to how to incentivize racers to drive away from this community of athletes and events, and it's an interesting question. It really is. I mean, there's a lot going on here that is compelling reason to stay and race here. So
those who love it, I mean, they're going to find a way. I mean, with Cross last year, we saw a crew from Steamboat Springs drive down pretty much every weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, there were races, there was literally 60 degrees in Boulder, and their Moots van had a foot of snow on top of it still when they were rolling into the parking lot.
Yeah, they give you the
It was
weather
awesome.
report. Yeah, it was negative 20 in Kremling today. It was negative 30 in Kremling, and down here it's all sunny.
And for our Boulder Cross Series, the best 4 out of 5 races count. So for them, they only had to commit to 4 races, which was great. Or some of them committed to all 5. And I think in a lot of those communities, you have a core group of, I'm a cyclist, I'm a cross racer, but the bigger effect in those Steamboat, Aspen type communities is people are athletes. They just want to go out there and they want to participate and be competitive, but it's not their life. They're not the diehard, we call them professional age groupers, where this is their sport, this is what they live to do. They're going to go out, they're going to do a marathon one day, they're going to go down, they're going to do a cross race. They might hop in, who knows, a road race in the spring. But they're just going to participate, and if they love it, they're going to find a way to do it more.
Yeah, they're mountain tough. There's a lot. Each of the mountain towns and the areas, they got these mountain tough guys and women, and you're just blown away at their athleticism. But they're not always engaged in series. And they just realize the limitations of life. You can't necessarily drive to all these events and get to them. But as far as getting events there, we always want to see events around the state, and that's one of our big challenges is how do we, you know, facilitate and support and help event directors grow events that are not, you know, within 50 miles of Boulder, essentially. And it's a really, really tough question, and that's where it becomes really difficult for us to say, how are we going to provide that value to these folks to say, by working with us, we will help you get more athletes, and whose expense are those athletes coming from until we actually all grow the number of athletes who want to be involved in these sort of events. You know, we're splitting the pie. We're really working to grow this pie so that all these promoters, whether here, whether professional, whether a club, you know, can succeed with the events that they're going to put the effort to put on.
And when it comes to cyclocross, I think that's the next big, I won't say battle, but hurdle to overcome, is there's going to come a day, and it's either 2014 or 2015, where there's going to have to be multiple races in the same weekend.
Yeah,
I don't know when
people.
too many people.
I mean, you're looking at what, 1,000 people showing up for a race?
Yeah.
Last year we averaged 650 every race. Our biggest one was 758. And if it comes to a point where it's 1,000 people, well then we know there's the pool of athletes that the community can support a race in Boulder and a race in Denver.
Right. And this has been a conversation that's been going on since I took this spot. One of the first things I was in was a cross promoters meeting, my first or second week at the job, and it came up then. Are we ready to have 2 races on one day? Are we ready to have a structure to the cross race day calendar such that Saturday runs X categories and Sunday runs Y categories? And the general consensus was among our event directors was, no, we're not ready for that. I said, okay, when would we be ready? And the magic number is probably about 800. When we're closer to 800 as these big weekend days, then 2 events could survive and make money if there was 2 to split those athletes apart. Our average last year, I think, was what, 460?
Right around there.
Over the course of the whole season. So very strong, but also not near that number. But we see the promoters, you know, we hear the promoters' dilemmas, we hear the hard work, we know what's going on. When you've got a race day calendar that is blasted, I mean, it's chock full from first daylight to the sun setting and cross. every weekend, week out, and you're going, everybody is under the gun on these races. It's huge. Promoters and officials and timing companies are out there really trying to get fields through, with a 10-minute gap between them. This whole thing could be made a lot simpler by having fewer categories or by having fewer categories at race on a given day. At some point, I think we are going to see where that becomes a reality, where, if the athletes and if our membership have said, we definitely need to have 25 categories, the simple reality is those cannot all run on one day safely, and it's a real detriment to the race experience. So, this is one thing we're really working towards in 14 is how do we do a better management of categories, and that can be either the categories that are out on a course on any given race day, or that can be the categories that are even on offer as part of our competitions, which would be a huge change.
And the chip timing was a big part of that. I mean, last year we saw the biggest cross race on the entire calendar, the first Belmont race, and without chip timing, those races weren't possible. Above 600, it wouldn't have been feasible to get the results out that quickly enough when you have 100-person rider fields. With chip timing, it allows us to expand the field sizes to that 115 max and to have 800 people in a day, or 800 people plus. It's also allowed us those unique formats that I talked to you about, where it's a relay format and an elimination format that before technologically just wasn't feasible.
Any chance you're going to be doing any non-competitive events without limits? Gran Fondo's, Gravel Grumble?
Everyone approaches us about it. A lot of groups have approached us about partnering on a Gran Fondo type race. I can't tell you how many winter event companies approach us to do a snowshoe race, or just a winter mud run or a summer mud run. Tony and I grew up athletes. We're still athletes. We still compete. So for us, in our hearts, we're not going to put on a race where we don't know it through and through as an athlete first, and it doesn't have that competitive element. It doesn't say it won't happen. We'd find a competitive twist on it. But for right now, we love what we're doing. We're looking at mountain bike races. I didn't grow up racing mountain bikes. I really don't know that space that well. So before we go into it, I'm going to start racing mountain bikes. I'm going to have Tony racing mountain bikes. Just to understand it, for us, it's always been about understanding the experience for the athlete side to know what we have to deliver from the production side.
To close up today, I'd like you to each just give me a 1-minute vision of 2013.
2013. Number one word is excitement. We're consolidating all the successes and the gains and the hard lessons that we learned over the last couple of years between timing, USAC, reintegrating collegiates, the track cup, and the new track in Boulder. We couldn't be more optimistic about where we are now and our relationship with our existing event directors and host communities. And obviously there's always work to be done, but we feel very positive about where we are sitting as an organization and our ability to interact with and support all the stakeholders and really work to grow the sport. I'm out of my mind with all the great things happening, and it's really neat that we see the road growth through the collegiate and through numbers coming up a little bit. We see the potential growth in track being huge with Boulder Valley, and we see cross, the sky's the limit, and then to top off our upcoming cross season with nationals. I mean, it's a fantastic time to be a bike rider, bike racer, and work in the bike world here in Colorado.
Lance?
Yeah, for us, I want to see Louisville Crit kind of build into Koppenberg, and then Koppenberg build to where we peak with the Morgul Bismarck. All our focus this year, with a lot of changes we've made with the colored numbers, working with Chris on that to help riders identify themselves within their category, it's always been geared towards the Morgul Bismarck. How do we make the most iconic race in Colorado that much better? How do we get people flying in from out of state saying, wow, Colorado's got what's going on? For cross, I want our series to really, for people in state and out of state who come to race here, for them to look at it and say, this is the best place to race as a beginner, but it's also the best place to race as a professional. And having those two ends of the spectrum met is a challenge. Usually races either cater to the beginner or they cater to the pro. For us, it's a challenge that we love to take on of finding a way to do both.
I
Lance Panigutti, Without Limits, Chris McGee, Bicycle Racing Association of Colorado. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Nice, thank you, George.
Appreciate it.
Also want to thank our wonderful supporters, Zeal Optics, Core Power, Nod and Rose for providing the lovely clothes. Thank you very much. And from the Retool Studios in Boulder, Colorado, Retool TV, I'm George Thomas.